You're watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
And welcome back to the program. I am joined now by the older brother, LeonJones. He was a Republican candidate for Arkansas Attorney General in 2022. His brother, Chris Jones, who was the Democratic nominee for Arkansas Governor in 2022. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us. Thank you for having us.
So before we even get into the stuff we're going to talk about here, what's Christmas dinner like at y'all's house in this political conversation? And how did you wind up a Democrat? How did you wind up a Republican?
Well, I'll give you kind of a 30-second. Christmas and Thanksgiving dinners are great. Number one, our mom makes the best, hands down caramel cake ever. And I was just telling the young lady just a moment ago, candy yams and hot water cornbread, the best. So we both agree on that. As it relates to our politics, we grew up in, I would say, a moderately conservative household. I never knew of any labels that were put on us when we were growing up. And so I think we just kind of chose different paths. I moved to Texas. My brother moved to Georgia and the Northeast.
That explains it all right there. So,
and so I think that's what.
Look, I think at the core of how we were raised was to look at situations, challenges, problems, issues, understand it from their root cause, and then think critically about and assess what is the best way to address the problem. That's how we were raised. Yeah. Now, we realized there were many ways to get to a solution.
That's
so
right.
You were both on a primary ticket last year. Do I need to go do the research and find out how your parents voted in which political primary? Do y'all know the answer to that question?
I honestly do not.
And I won't ask.
It's public record.
It is.
That's true. That's true. He is the older brother, though.
All right. We'll see if that means he's the preferred brother.
Well, we'll leave that alone, too.
Yeah, we'll leave that alone.
All right. Let's start with what's been going on in the state legislature. I'm going to summarize a few of the things we had a little bit in the news block earlier in the show. Drag queens, transgender bathrooms, these have been the things that have dominated the oxygen at the state capitol in this first month of the session. Is that what you guys were hearing on the campaign trail last year? Those are the -- issues that were affecting Arkansans, Chris?
Look, exactly 0 people talked about it on the campaign trail. What came up was, and I traveled to all 75 counties. I walked a mile with thousands of people. Folks were talking about high quality education in Conway and Eureka Springs. They were talking about the housing crunch. In Blytheville, they were talking about water conservation to preserve generations old hunting grounds. People were looking for solutions to real problems that they faced. And what folks on the campaign trail wanted to hear were things like the Democrats' RAISE Act. And they wanted solutions to the problems they faced. They wanted teachers to get more pay. They wanted our roads to be fixed. Yeah. That's what they were focused on.
Yeah, Leon, what were you hearing on the campaign trail?
More particularly, I was hearing about issues as it relates to gun ownership and gun rights. I was hearing more particularly about issues as it relates to critical race theory and education, which is why I think our legislators have decided to advance some of those bills early on. And so I think the legislators that were elected, they are doing what their constituents asked them to do. They're filing bills that their constituents were interested in.
Yeah. So another bill that came up this past week, Senator Dan Sullivan, Senate Bill 71, would basically, in his words, eliminate affirmative action in the state of Arkansas, at least on the government and the higher education side. Is that a good road to go down?
I don't think it's necessarily a bad road to go down because at the end of the day, private industry, it can't be regulated by the government in that way. The government can be regulated like that through the legislature, and so them eliminating so-and-so as it relates to affirmative action, and basically he changed the wording, right? He went from civil rights to basically desegregation and non-discrimination. And so those words kind of playing word games, if you will, but at the end of the day, I think if you do make more parity as it relates to hiring and advancement in state government, I think it's better.
Senator Clark Tucker said that this effectively means that racism and sexism is dead in Arkansas. That was how he described it right there. So what do you think, Chris?
You know, I don't get why it's even coming up as an issue. If it effectively does nothing, right, as was just said. Because you can't you can't eliminate discrimination and racism by proxy, by proclamation. It's not going to go away. I think it's a distraction from focusing on the real issues that people face. I would recommend that Dan read the book by Ira Katznelson called When Affirmative Action Was White. He probably won't get it in the Jonesboro Library because it's banned, but I can loan him my copy. But because the reality is, like, we're not looking at the root causes of issues and problems. And in some cases, and my brother just said it, like, it's changing wording, it's not actually solving a problem.
Right. All right, let's move on to education reform. It's coming. We don't know when, maybe in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Is it though?
It is coming. It's going to be an omnibus bill. It's going to include everything from teacher pay to pre-K investment, a more focus on reading literacy, and there will be a voucher program in there of some sort. Is bringing this as an omnibus bill, I'll come to you first on this, Chris, is that the right strategy for getting it through this legislature?
I think the question is for who? It's savvy. It's a way to get things through. But for starters, process-wise, I'm not sure if it's even possible. I'm not sure that you can do it given the legislative process might not allow you to lump it all together. But I'm not the lawyer here, somebody else have to answer that. That being said, I do think that it's incumbent upon us, when you talk about one of the largest bills in the history of Arkansas that could shift more tax dollars than any other bill before, to ram it down and to put a bunch of things in there, to me is a disservice. You should be able to vote piece by piece on up or down on what's in the bill, and then go back to your constituents and say and justify why you voted for different pieces.
Leon?
I think the only way you're going to get it passed is through an omnibus bill. Because it's so large and because there are so many different components to this education bill, and you also have to think about the appropriation that needs to go with it as well. Yeah. And if you don't put it in an omnibus bill, you won't get it passed.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, but again, that's part of the problem, right? So you throw it in, and now you're hiding vouchers behind teacher pay. And the question is, how do you feel about vouchers? Like, let's have a debate on, will it lead to rural schools being closed? Let's have a debate on, how do you pay for it? How do you focus on fraud when you have parents getting money and like we talk about fraud and waste in the government. How do you police that?
All right, I gotta end it on air right here, but you guys stick around. We're gonna take this online, okay? So if anybody wants to catch more of this conversation, Capitol View /AR or talkbusiness.net. All right, we ran out of time on air with Leon Jones, Chris Jones, because we got so much more to talk about. So this is an online extra. Thank you guys for sticking around a little bit longer. So we were talking about the education package. Chris makes the point of there should be an up and down vote about school vouchers. There should be an up and down vote about teacher pay. Do you agree that that's a better strategy than the one that that Governor Sanders is rolling in with this omnibus bill? It's a take it or leave it approach.
Well, I think that's a great strategy if you want to spend time debating these bills, right? But I don't think that that's the strategy that the governor or the General Assembly has. They want to vote on it and move on to something else. And so they're going to put it in an omnibus package that we may not see until the first week in March. And then they'll debate it for a couple of days. They'll pass it and we move on.
I don't know how much they're going to debate it. I think once that sucker gets out, it's coming. It's moving.
It's in and out. And don't get me wrong. I agree. It is the savvy thing to do.
Absolutely.
If you want to get the bill passed and you want to get it done and move on, it's a savvy thing to do. But if you want to be transparent, if you want accountability, if you want real debate and dialogue, which is not what they want, then you would have a debate and do an up and down vote. They're not doing that though.
Well, but the thing is, I mean, once they bring it to the floor, there will be some debate, right? It's not just going to pass without any debate.
It's performative though.
But whether performative or not.
I'll be curious to see if some of the legislators push back and say, I want some time to take this back to my superintendents.
That's exactly right.
I want time to take this back to my communities and get some further
feedback.
input on this, because they're not involved in the process right now. It's a small working group, I think, that is putting a lot of this together.
Legislators don't even know what's going on. Now, again, I think they should. I hope they do. But the right thing to do is to give ample airspace and time, because this is a massive shift. It's an education overhaul. It's a shift in our tax dollars, and we should have time to debate it and discuss it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's
We
right.
won't.
I think we do. I think we should have time to debate it and discussion. And here's the thing about the legislature: they meet every 2 years. So if something is in this thing that's broken, guess what? They're going to come back and fix it. And so we're going to have time to debate it. We're going to have time to discuss it. We're going to have time to actually go in and look at the details. It will be after it's passed. I'll give you that. But at the end of the day, it is an overhaul that the governor wants to see happen, and it's going to happen.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to sentencing reform, another subject that is going to be, I think, massive in this legislative session. I interviewed Representative Jimmy Gazaway this week. He told me, which I thought was newsworthy, that this is not going to be an omnibus bill. This will be a series of packages. There's just no way to kind of put all of those parts together into one great big deal. Now, that may change, but I mean, that's, I think, where things stand right now. Again, is this the right approach to do it in a package format where you've got specialty courts, sentencing reforms, prison beds, and jail space? So is that a better approach?
Oh, absolutely.
But it's not the savvy approach.
No, it's not the savvy approach, but I think it is the better approach, right? Because, I mean, when you're talking about prisons, we're talking about locking up people, we're talking about taking their freedom. And when we're doing that, yes, they commit crimes, and so they should be punished for that. But when we're talking about overhauling prisons and reform, we have to be able to sit down and actually debate those things and actually look at each piece of that legislative package. And so I think this is a great thing to do. Listen, from my perspective, I think that we need to be talking more about teaching kids how to read in the 3rd grade so that we can build less prisons 20 years later, but that's not what this package is for.
Yeah. Chris?
I don't think the argument changes. I agree that it should be debated. There should be airspace and time to get into it, similarly to the education bill. I think the first Governor Huckabee had it right when he said, look, we have to lock up people who are truly dangerous and not people who we're mad at. When we have to think about the fact that we incarcerate more people per capita than 45 other states, and yet our crime rate is higher than 46 other states.
Wouldn't you argue, though, that one of the reasons why that incarceration doesn't deter crime is because they're getting out after 1/6 or 1/7 of their sentence? They're not serving a full sentence. I mean, I think that's the argument against incarceration.
I don't know
that
there's any evidence or proof that that's the case. I mean, I think what we know is that we have a high per capita incarceration rate, and yet it hasn't deterred crime. I think my brother made a great point that we need to be looking at things like 3rd grade reading. We need to be looking at jobs in our communities. We need to be looking at transportation to those jobs and real reform as opposed to just caging people up. Again, if you're a violent criminal, absolutely, yes, we need space for that. But, you know, we're not addressing the root cause is my point.
But even with violent crime, to Roby's point, we're letting people out after they do 1/6 of their time. And so, I mean, when I did do criminal defense work in Northwest Arkansas, you know, my clients would come to me and it's like, hey, you know, how much time am I really going to have to serve? Yeah. And so you're talking a 6-year sentence, they may serve 9 months.
And again, I'm not debating that point. I'm agreeing with you on that point. I'm saying that you don't, but when you do that for everyone, and when you're, again, going back to what the first Governor Huckabee said, like when you're locking up folks for meth offenses, as opposed to real reform and addressing mental health issues and addressing education, then all you're doing is, you know, adding more beds and you're not actually solving the problem.
Yeah, but when you're talking about criminals and going to the criminal justice system, somebody who commits a crime, they need to be locked up for that crime, and they need to be. And I think a better deterrent is to keep them in jail longer if they commit a crime that they're convicted for.
I think a better deterrent is to address the problem before it happens.
Yeah, but we can't necessarily always just address that root cause of the problem. We have to address we have to address the result of the problem, which is the crime.
You're saying you got to walk and chew gum at the same time.
You have to.
You got to do both.
No, I'm saying you can do both. I'm saying you do both as well.
Yeah.
My point though isn't that you shouldn't do both. My point is that just blindly increasing the number of prison beds is likely not going to solve the problem when you look at the evidence and the data. We already incarcerate a number of people, so you have to do, I think you do both. I agreed with you. You focus on 3rd grade reading. I agreed with you. You focus on economic development.
Sure.
But as opposed to blindly just increasing the number of prison beds, which is why this is a great thing to break up and have a debate about and a discussion about, similarly to the education
But the
bill.
whole bill is not just increasing prison beds, right?
Agreed.
The bill has other components to it, and that's why we really need to debate it.
I agree. We're saying the same thing. Let's have a debate about it, because there are parts of it that work well when you can have some bipartisan agreement, and there are other parts you say, well, is this really going to address the problem that we're talking about?
You know what I learned the most from this conversation today? Is that you were a criminal defense lawyer in Northwest Arkansas. I didn't know there was crime in Northwest Arkansas. I am stunned. I just thought it was the land of milk and honey, and the streets are paved in gold up there. But you're telling me
both can be true.
But we can walk and chew gum.
All right, I got to end it there. So I think you got to run a Chromebook to school or something like that. So all right, Chris Jones, Leon Jones, thank you both so much for the online extra here. Appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
All right,
appreciate it.
Thank y'all for tuning in.